Today I had a conversation with Dr. Peter McCullough. He's one of the most published doctors in his field of cardiology, and he became pretty famous during the pandemic in 2020 because he was one of the only doctors that was speaking up about trying to treat patients before they got to the hospital. And he got a lot of pushback for that, and he's been dealing with a lot of scrutiny for that. And before the conversation started, he told me that if I wanted this podcast to survive on YouTube and other platforms, that we should be very careful about our word choices because there's algorithms and AI tools now that basically search for these keywords and remove podcasts or shadow ban you. And he knows better than anybody, so I took his advice, and it was very difficult because I'm not used to trying to censor my words in conversation. So you'll understand what we're talking about here, and just do your best to have an open mind and listen to the information here, and maybe even go back and listen to some of his other conversations on different podcasts. He was on Joe Rogan in 2021, I believe, and I think he's going to be looked back at in 10 or 15 years as a hero of our time, and I hope other doctors start to follow suit and start to pay attention to what's going on here, because this goes far beyond the pandemic. It goes deeper into more of the corrupt nature of our medical system and big pharma and the banks and a whole bunch of other things. We got into Klaus Schwab, the Great Reset, and a whole bunch of other elements that are tied to what we saw go down in 2020. And I think it's one of those things that a lot of people just don't want to talk about anymore, and they want to move on. But I am a believer that if we don't continue to talk about it and pay attention to it, that we are far more susceptible to the next thing that is thrown at us. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Please rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube, and share the show. That helps people to find it, and enjoy the episode.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
All right, Dr. Peter McCullough, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you.
Great to drop in, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I know your time is valuable, and you've had quite the few years, and so you have a lot of work on your plate. So I do appreciate you. I just wanted to give you a platform to share your message with more people, because I think you're courageous and you've stepped up like most people haven't. We're seeing more people step up. But from the beginning, I've been following your work when you started to be outspoken about the subject we're going to get into. And, I'm in an industry as a first responder where my job was on the line for not getting a jab. And your work actually helped me to make that decision, along with a few others, Robert Malone and many others. So thank you for that. And I'd love to just hear a little bit about your trajectory so people that are being exposed to you for the first time can hear where you were pre-pandemic and how you've sort of started to pay attention to what was going on, what happened to you, and where we're headed now.
Well, again, thanks so much for having me on the program. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. I'm in practice as an internal medicine and cardiovascular physician in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I'm board certified in both, continuously board certified now for decades. And, prior to the pandemic, I was a professor of medicine. I traveled the world, lectured, had trained hundreds of trainees under me, students, residents, cardiology fellows. And I was editor of two major textbooks, Cardiorenal Medicine. I was the author of the chapter of a similar name in Brunwald's Textbook of Cardiology. I was the editor of Cardiorenal Medicine Journal and Reviews in Cardiovascular Medicine, and was the president of the Cardiorenal Society of America. So you get the idea. I studied heart and kidney function. And I had a blend of clinical practice and academic work, and I wasn't tracking any of the pandemic preparedness planning events. So I didn't know that, for instance, in 2005, that HHS and Congress wrote the PrEP Act that said we are going to have pandemics, and when we do, we're going to have government countermeasures put in place. I didn't know that. I didn't know that we were doing joint work, U.S. and Chinese, in a Chinese biosecurity lab. on coronavirus. I just didn't know it. And I didn't know that Johns Hopkins and Gates Foundation put on a planning seminar called the SPARS pandemic. And they said there will be a virus, it'll come out of China, it's going to infect the world. And to make matters worse, and I bet you didn't either, because you were like me, you were busy doing your job. You didn't know that, again, the Gates Foundation, Johns Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Health, they held it was called Event 201. And this was a filmed simulation exercise. Again, it says the virus is coming out of China. And our current director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, was paired up with the Chinese CDC director. He flew over to the United States, and their workshop was, how do we conceal the origins of the virus? I didn't know any of this was going on. I was in my usual practice. I'm one of the most published people in my field in the world in history. I was on, health system task forces for how to handle the pandemic once it started. And I realized a giant academic opportunity was the fact that no one had come up with an early outpatient treatment protocol. I thought for sure Harvard or Mayo Clinic or Johns Hopkins, someone would say, oh, well, this is what you do when someone gets sick to help them avoid hospitalization and death. But as the weeks went on, people had no answer for this. And I assembled a team, Dallas, Detroit, Emory, Yale, and we published the very first protocol of how to treat patients to help them avoid hospitalization and death. And it became copyrighted as the McCullough Protocol. It's the most widely used approach today for high-risk patients to treat them. It's been credited with saving tens of millions of lives and sparing hundreds of millions of hospitalizations. So I can tell you, it's the most rewarding work of my entire career.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I appreciate your work on that. And it was being repressed and censored, and you were being, how many lives that we couldn't save or you couldn't help save because of the lack of the ability to communicate this stuff.
Good point. When I first put out just the 4 graphics from the paper, it was published in the American Journal of Medicine in August of 2020, a widely read journal. I made a quick YouTube video over it, and it was censored in a matter of 48 hours. And it was just a quick scientific review. So I learned then, this is in 2020, I learned then that something was up. I knew that there were changes. I had been contacted by a widely read Washington journal called The Hill. It's read by the House, the Senate, White House, the press. And myself, I was a professor of medicine in Dallas, and Scott Atlas, professor of medicine in Palo Alto. We were both invited to write a series of opinion editorials. And he was focusing on masking and lockdowns and social distancing. I was focusing on the spread of the illness. How is it spreading? Its contagiousness. And then methods of how to treat it. What would be, a likely scenario where we would want to treat, included risk stratification. Not everybody was at equal risk for severe outcomes. But I published an op-ed in August of 2020, a very important month. And the title of the op-ed is The Great Gamble of the Development Program for the Products Taken in the Arm. And you're talking to the only public figure in the world who questioned this before they came out. There's not a single chairman of medicine, infectious diseases, no one at these non-for-profit organizations, no one in the paramedic community, no one in the nursing community. No one questioned these. And I was the only one. I said, wait a minute, the first ones out of the gate were basically the genetic code for the S protein. The S protein is on the surface of the virus. We knew that this was altered in the Chinese lab to become more infectious and actually be lethal to human beings. This was known ahead of time. We knew that this protein got stuck in tissues, the heart, the brain, reproductive organs. We knew it caused blood clots. And I thought it was absolutely the most reckless and dangerous idea to insert the genetic code for this protein and then produce it in the human body for an uncontrolled duration and quantity over time. It was sheer madness, the entire idea. And to
Yeah.
this day, you can take a look. The question is, how come other people didn't have the same concerns?
And they did, but they were also, what's the reason do you think? At first you thought it was incompetence. A lot of people thought, well, everybody's incompetent or ignorant to it. But no, it was actually an orchestrated top-down effort. Once you start to dig into this, there's an incredible orchestrated element to it that becomes more scary than the virus and the jab or whatever you want to call it. We had to censor ourselves before this talk, so we're trying to be careful with our words because of the nature of the
Right.
circumstance we're in.
But wait a minute. In 2020, we're talking 2020. Free speech platforms, try to scan them. See if anybody, any public figure expressed a concern before they were released. I even went to Children's Health Defense, which is known to have a lot of concerns regarding, this product safety, the routine childhood schedule. And I was able to find a podcast that Robert F. Kennedy was on, Sherry Tenpenny, several others. And they were generally concerned about that whole product class. And they said, well, this one coming along for the pandemic, we'll probably have problems. But there was no alarm. There was no concern. If you were to go across any of the other, you're going across any of the other platforms, you can't find this. You know what I think what was going on? What was going on was, in a sense, people were in a trance. And for hundreds of years, these products, in a sense, have been almost held like an ideology, like a religion. If you take it in the arm, it's like a talisman. You're protected. This has gone on through smallpox and polio, measles, a whole variety of illnesses. And, I can tell you that people were in a trance. They really thought that given this religious belief about these products in general, a ton of fear, and you inject a ton of money in it, that was the recipe for what's considered mass formation psychosis, that people were essentially in a trance. Do you know that there were societies of natural medicine and others that, you'd clearly expect that they would be worried about this new class of drugs? You can't even find them making public statements regarding anticipated concerns. It was only after they came out and people started to realize, oh my Lord, we're in trouble.
Yeah, and I think that points to the biggest problem here is that people are very compliant, obedient, and driven by fear. And it seems like the people that are engineering things a certain way, they've understood the social and behavioral sciences to a certain degree, and they've implemented the capacity to deploy whatever they want to deploy. And we got to see a psychological warfare, biological warfare. And it seems like that's what you're becoming more and more aware of. And it's like, so is the general population. Not a lot of people, but there's quite a few that are hip to it now. But that was very scary during the beginning phases of 2020 when we saw just how fast the authoritarian regime could take place, which if you look back through history, that's far more scary than any pandemic, is just trusting authority blindly and letting people, have control.
Well, for most of us, it was our first and only public health emergency that affected us. Remember, 100 years ago, Spanish flu. So pandemics should not be occurring once every 100 years. So a lot of people, would miss this. But we're now told that they're going to come every year or so. And what we learned is that there's what's called dual purpose research, that there's research going on in labs to make viruses, bacteria, and fungi more infectious and lethal, and at the same time making countermeasures, products that you take by injection or infusion or orally. It's called dual purpose research. In fact, the Biden administration just put out legislation on this in May of 2024. Very little oversight. It's basically game on for gain of function research. Is going on in university labs, probably in every state in the country, worldwide. It's massively funded by the US government, by pharmaceutical companies, by foundations like the Gates Foundation. It's like having nuclear warheads being developed in university labs all over the world with no regulation. And people are
Wow.
going to wonder, well, how did this get out of the lab? Well, beakers can break, air conditioning systems can break down, people can accidentally touch various instruments, pipettes, and someone can get sick from the products they're working on in the lab. And right now, there seems to be no concern over future risks of biological labs and gain of function research. There appears to be no concerns regarding safety issues for the widely used products taken in the arm. Patients are pouring into clinics with all kinds of problems now, even years after taking them. My practice is so busy, I barely have a time to even turn around or take a breath. And it's just one person after another has been damaged by the products taken in the arm. So we've seen a global sweep towards broad enthusiasm for the injectable products taken in the arm, like almost like with a religious fervor, and no concern regarding safety, even trying to prevent future pandemics or trying to come up with safer, better products that would be injected. None whatsoever. There's over 1,000 human randomized trials now of new products that would be taken in the arm, and there are stated aspirations by the World Health Organization, Agenda 2030, where the aspiration is to have 500 new products, in addition to all the ones available right now, to be given to individuals to ostensibly try to protect them from disease, to fulfill this religious pursuit of mankind improving God's creation.
And as you've dug into this, obviously no one's being held accountable for what already happened and what's happening. They're being incentivized to keep going. Do you, as you start to diagnose it, which is what you're pretty good at, do you think the end game is just continuous profit, or is it actually for something far more nefarious, which is what it seems like? It's hard to know, right?
There are times in mankind in history where there's a madness, in a sense. This is a madness that's leading to injuries, disabilities, and deaths with this kind of broad enthusiasm. And some people are starting to wake up and say, wait a minute, these cause heart damage. It says it right there in all the government warnings. They cause blood clots. They cause neurologic damage. The government databases are showing large numbers of people are dying. At some point in time, I think people will break out of the madness. It's obvious. I was never in the madness, neither were you, but it's only a small number of people who have any clarity in their vision right now. Many are clouded. And again, it's a religious belief, because if you ever want to strike up a conversation regarding these products, the first thing people say is, I don't want to talk about it. And, if you walked into a Bible study and you said things that were kind of anti-Christian, if people were polite, they'd say, listen, I don't want to talk about it. If you were to go into a mosque and, spew anti-Islamic statements, they'd probably tell you to get out. They get pretty angry. Same thing, things that were, against any faith. It's the same thing here. Now, you can go into a medical meeting or a meeting with other health providers, and you can talk dispassionately about blood pressure medicine or antibiotics or bronchodilators or whatever. But you can't talk about these products you take in the arm.
Right.
You can't.
And I've always been deemed the conspiracy guy. And, even before the mandate, I was speaking out against it from the beginning, writing in this, we have the whole department can see a message board basically. And I said, this is coming. They're going to mandate this. And obviously I was put into this strange category of tinfoil hat guy. But what's really crazy, like you said, is now to this day, nobody wants to talk about it. And this is the most important thing to talk about. But I think it's been orchestrated in that regard too. If you think of how ideologies are put against the masses and you look at the history of MK Ultra, and I think they just understand how to do this so well that's what we are in Brave New World, where everybody's okay and distracted so well with TikTok and their big gulps and sugar and sports. And I think everybody just wants to avoid it and feel good temporarily without looking at the truth.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there's a lot of people. The average person on the street just doesn't want to talk about this, doesn't know about it. As far as they know, from their perspective, they had to wear a mask for a while. It was inconvenient. They're back at work. Everything's back, and they took one or two of these in 2021. Nothing seemed to happen. They got the illness anyway. Many people just concluded, listen, they just don't work, obviously, because you take them and you get the illness anyway. And that's it. That's really kind of that's their entire experience of the pandemic. Yet others will recall that, gosh, their mother got really sick with the illness, was hospitalized. No doctor would give any drugs as an outpatient. Their loved one nearly died in the hospital, got out. Then their doctor told them to take it in the arm, and then they died in the vaccine center. So
Right.
some have been greatly damaged by the pandemic. There's been two waves of injury: the viral infection, and now these countermeasures that are given in the arm. Those two broad measures have both installed the spike protein, the spine on the surface of the organism, in the human body, and that's what's causing all this damage. Essentially, 97% of us have some evidence of this in our bodies, and the real question is, what does humanity do right now? It's not healthy to have a foreign protein that was engineered in a Chinese biosecurity lab in virtually every human on Earth.
Yeah, and now they can deploy them at will without anybody questioning it. It's almost like everybody just wants to act like it's behind us now. And it's like, no, this is just the beginning, as you're speaking to. And I'd love to hear some of eventually we want to get into your protocol so that people have access to that. We'll send them to that because it's important for the people that are injured or know somebody that's injured. But I wanted to talk to you about, have you spoken to Dr. Jack Kruse or heard of any of his work by chance? He's a neurosurgeon.
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, after this is over, I'll make sure I send you something, but he's being repressed and his TED Talks were banned. And he's got some interesting points about what would be called. And Kevin McKiernan has discovered some issues with what's inside of this potential, is what he's calling it. And it's going to increase. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, or if you've been exposed to some of these ideas.
If you look on the government websites, now, like National Security Administration or Office of National Intelligence, they'll use the word that you just used. But they'll say this. They'll say, listen, with low probability, the virus probably came out of the Wuhan lab. But it's not a... Well, how do they determine that? There's two papers by Yen and one by Farkas published in Military Medicine that have concluded, in fact, the virus meets every criteria for being a weapon. It does. And what the agencies are doing is they know we have signed a UN treaty that says we will not engage in the development of these weapons. And they know that, in a sense, we've broken the treaty. That's the reason why they'll never admit that's the case. But whether it was intentional or unintentional, the whole world got sick with this. And we know that the infection is actually very similar to what the administrations in the arm cause. They cause very similar syndromes because the protein quantity is so much higher taken in the arm. There's much greater risks of everything. But sadly, they don't work. So most people, have both exposures. And my office is full of cases of heart damage and myocarditis, cardiac arrest, heart failure, blood clots, stroke, Guillain-Barré syndrome, small fiber neuropathy, a syndrome called POTS, ANA positive autoimmune syndromes, Sjogren's. So now about 5 to 10% of the entire population now has a new chronic disease thanks to the pandemic.
Wow. And that's something that people do not want to hear as well. They almost avoid it. If you even bring it up, it's like, yeah, right. They have so much trust in the authorities and in the people that have, I think, deployed this situation that we're in. which is even more scary, is that people do not want to recognize some of the data that's coming in. And I'd love to hear some of the stats of what you think the injuries and deaths are from this.
Well, this is what we know, that in the vSafe data, which is a CDC self-reported data, people had cell phones, 10 million people participated in this. After they took it in the arm, and this is pretty rapid reporting, 7.7% got so sick they had to go to an urgent care or ER, be hospitalized. So it's pretty clear. I mean, 7.7% is a huge number. There were multiple papers published from the 2021 products that showed probably a third of people got so sick they couldn't go to work the next day. So many actually knew these were very toxic products. We don't take routine shots like this that cause you to be so sick you can't go to work. I mean, a third? I mean, it's stunning, particularly healthcare workers. They seem to be, paying attention to what's going on. That was all in 2021. Now papers emerged from Schmeling, Maneke, in the United States, Hooker. They've all demonstrated that the batches were not the same. It turns out probably a third or more of people had zero side effects. They took it in the arm, didn't even have a sore arm, no fever, nothing, as if they took nothing. Another 2/3 or so, maybe 50%, they had some modest symptoms. And then we're down to this 5 to 10%, maybe in the Swedish data, maybe up to 30%. Boy, they're in trouble. They really got sick. And it's that group we're focusing on. They took kind of the same lots. We think maybe the vials had hyperconcentration of the genetic product. They could have been contaminated with.
It's unbelievable. Can you describe to me and some of the people that are going to be listening some of the organization to this whole situation as you started to dig into how we got here? The WHO, Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, these people that seem to be driving all of this for profit or for whatever other incentives they're doing it.
Well, in my book, Courage to Face It, Preventing Hospitalizations and Deaths While Battling the Biopharmaceutical Complex, we describe a working syndicate that's formed over time, probably formed over decades. We believe at the top is the World Health Organization. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar organization, many tens of thousands of employees. This is not a small operation. It has, it's unelected. It's a non-governmental organization. So WHO is in for sure. United Nations for sure. World Economic Forum, definitely. Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Trust, Wellcome Trust, Gavi, UNAID, the Department of State in the United States, TGA and NHS, MHRA, SAFRA, EMA. These are all the agencies. So they form this syndicate where, their goal is pandemic response, public health. In fact, Gates and World Economic Forum formed another unit within the complex called CEPI, Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation. And CEPI says in their business plan, there will be a series of pandemics, one after another. And for each one, there's one solution, and that is a mass product taken in the arm. No interest in therapeutics whatsoever. So this complex has figured out that if we can create enough of a global crisis, we can actually get the entire world to take one of these products, and the doors of treasuries open and money flows to the complex. And the complex then rewards people in the governmental agencies with future jobs. And this has basically been an incubator for wide open corruption.
It's unbelievable, and it's hard for people to digest, including myself, who's been paying attention to this for a long time. It's still hard to swallow that, but it's important to talk about it, and that's why we're here. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on, now that we're seeing all the sickness emerge. You said your clinic's packed. I'm seeing it out as a first responder, but no one's able to correlate these illnesses to that specific thing in the arm. So it's hard to pin it down and say, well, that's why you had the blood clot, or that's why you had the
Mhm.
seizure or stroke. So it's hard to get real data right now. And it's hard for people to actually share this information as we're censoring ourselves right now, because
Mhm.
there is AI algorithmic measures to repress information from being shared. So there's this huge orchestrated effort to repress speech, which is the foundation of sharing truth. And I think that's the biggest issue that we're dealing with too, as some form of oppressive nature of our circumstance. So what do you think people should start doing as far as paying attention to the corrupt nature of the element we're in?
Well, everyone should keep track of the number of times they had the infection. You just write it down, like what was the month and the year. That's step number one. Everybody should have their card where they took it in the arm. Don't lose that card. So, when you present to the emergency room with a blood clot in the leg, and I see blood clots going from the ankle to the hip, that's unusual. Blood clots, as you know, you're typically about a centimeter before the pandemic. Now we're seeing ones that are, tens of centimeters in length. And the patient and the family need to present that to the doctors and say, listen, we know both the infection and the products in the arm that they actually cause blood clots. Take this down into the record. They should demand a blood test for antibodies against the S protein. So this S protein is in all of our bodies. We form antibodies to it. The antibodies are long lasting, and they are correlated with the quantity of the S protein. So in my clinic, we use the Roche Alexis system. It's an extended range. It goes from 0 to over 25,000 units. Very, very useful test. We know that less than 1,000 is just low risk previous infection. Greater than 1,000 progressively, we can attribute it to symptoms. Usually at 10, 15, 20,000, I start seeing blood clots, heart damage. And so this test helps objectify what's going on. So if the doctor says, no, it's not related to the take of the arm, patients say, get that blood test. I want the antibodies to the S protein. Now, shortly, we'll be able to directly measure the S protein, but that's a huge step forward. Another test that's kind of a giveaway, it's what's called the D-dimer. D-dimer is a blood test for micro blood clotting. Becomes elevated when the S protein is up in the system. Plenty of data to support that. And then there are characteristic syndromes. For instance, myocarditis. Before the pandemic, I saw like 2 cases my entire career. Now I see 2 cases a day. And it's clear, the FDA says the products cause myocarditis or heart damage. It's not controversial. So we have a young person coming in and they have their clinical diagnosis is myocarditis. You say, well, listen, it's because they took it in the arm. The FDA agrees. Don't be confused. The respiratory illness does not cause myocarditis. That's been completely debunked now. The Open Safely study has been done. Millions of young people in the UK. None of the myocarditis cases are due to the respiratory infection. It's all due to the products taken in the arm. The autopsies of people who have died with the respiratory illness, there is no virus in the heart, and there are no adjudicated cases of people in the hospital. They could have an elevated troponin that may trigger an ICD code, but that's not clinical myocarditis. So all of these manuscripts that declared myocarditis was super common with the infection in the hospital, it's just ICD code error. It's not a real condition. So even the American College of Cardiology has it wrong. They say, oh, there's more myocarditis with the infection than the products. It couldn't be anything further from the truth. It's all due to taking the products. It's considered iatrogenic myocarditis.
At what point in your journey of this last 4 or 5 years did you start to just really go, wow, this is not incompetence, this is an orchestrated effort, because you were trying to prescribe people certain medicines that we can't bring up the names of because we'll be scrubbed from the internet. But as you started to try to do in-home treatment and I couldn't say that even. As you started to try to treat this issue, you were being censored. And what do you think that process was for you? And what do you think the mechanisms in place were that kept that from happening?
I had a big aha moment when someone showed me the press release from the BBC for the Trusted News Initiative, the TNI. It came out December 10th, 2020. the same day they released the products in the United States. And what the Trusted News Initiative said is they said there will be dangerous misinformation regarding these products. How did they know? And that misinformation will lead to hesitancy. And so because of this, we must censor anything that's going to lead to hesitancy, anything that would make somebody think, wow, I shouldn't take that. And that's how everything was suppressed. It was intentional. They said they were going to do this in Event 201, and they did. They did. It was all laid out for us. So this was an intentional censorship. This was well described to the executives at YouTube and Meta and Facebook. And later on, Zuckerberg came out and said, yeah, the government, kind of forced me to do this. This was all laid out in advance. People didn't have a chance at getting any information on early treatment. It was very, very actively suppressed in order to kind of prepare the population to accept it in the arm. And then clearly when safety information came out on the products and deaths, they were scrubbed instantly from the media and social media. In 2021, you could find some obituaries on the internet where it said this mother is a mother of 2 children. She took it and then she died of a blood clot. You could see that in 2021. In fact, there was a CNN legal correspondent who took it and then just died of a fatal allergic reaction. African-American woman, I believe her name is Midgen Lewis. And the bottom line is, that was written up. She said, yeah, she took it and she died. And then once people started to realize, especially this Trusted News Initiative, that, wait a minute, that's going to lead to a lot of people saying, no way, I'm not taking these. Then it became scrubbed. So now we see deaths and there's just no mention of the cause of death. It's just like, oh, they died. They died. And what we know, and you've gone out on these paramedic runs where people die at home. You see it all the time. So the cause of death prior to the pandemic is always known. It's 40% due to heart disease, 40% due to cancer, and 20% other causes like homicide, suicide, drug overdose. But the point is, it's always known. The cause of death is known in virtually every case. It's a long history of cancer, a long history of heart failure, etc. But young people just dying with no explanation, when that started happening, we started carefully looking at this. And so Nick Holscher and I published the autopsy paper of just, when parents and people got autopsies, it turned out in our analysis that 73.9% of cases, it was due to taking it in the arm. It was an obvious blood clot. It was obvious myocarditis. And when these cardiac arrests occurred and we thought it was myocarditis, 100% of the time it was due to the product, 100% of the time. So I can tell you this much, an athlete says, wow, I had a cardiac arrest, I have myocarditis. Well, I know what that's due to. That's due to taking it in the arm. Even if you took it in 2021, you can actually have the cardiac arrest or heart failure in 2024. And I testified in Congress. People ask me, Dr. McCullough, how much longer is this going to go on? Because most people took them in 2021 and they stopped. They knew they were bad. And I told Congress 5 to 15 years of worry now.
Oh, wow. So 15 years it can be that we're going to be dealing with this protein, or you can't say that, the S protein. Wow. And then I did remember there was a guy who was a big investor. He wrote a book. I forget what it was called, maybe Sudden Death or something. And it was about death certificates for people in a certain age group just spiking during the last few years. Have you heard of that? Like all the younger people that never...
Yeah, that book is by former BlackRock executive Edward Dowd. And it's called Cause of Death Unknown, or Died Suddenly, I believe. And it's astronomical. In some jurisdictions, there was a report out of Alberta, Canada, the leading cause of death is unknown. And, I can tell you as a doctor, I'm an epidemiologist, I study this, is due to the widespread use of these experimental products. There was a paper by Crossan and colleagues that showed the genetic material from taking it in the arm. It's physically in the heart. It's physically there. the S protein that's produced from the is physically in the heart causing inflammation. And this is a straight line association. Nick Hulsher and myself, an epidemiologist from University of Michigan, he's working at the McCullough Foundation. We've just reported, and it's been accepted, fully peer-reviewed, that in Seattle, King County, when they rolled these out and they took all these injections, and I did my residency in Seattle. They have Medic One. It's one of the elite paramedic systems in the country. They had skyrocketing cardiac arrests. It was directly related. And not only that, it was not only increasing cardiac arrests, but the cardiac arrests were more lethal. The chances of getting the patients back were less. And this was during a time where temporarily the population of Seattle contracted during COVID. It didn't expand, it contracted, and cardiac arrests went up. So we see this all over. Recently, I saw Steve Kirsch report in a Substack that Santa Clara County had the identical finding. A paper by myself and an Italian researcher from the athletic leagues in Europe showed skyrocketing rates in 2021 of the soccer players and rugby players who took this. This is greatly concerning. So we do think there was this initial wave of injuries. I'm still worried about anybody who took it in 2021. Once we got to 2022 and 2023, they did become much safer.
And why are they much safer, do you think?
I think the companies learned that they were having large numbers of deaths. So the first one approved, when it got out, within 90 days in their dossier, they recorded 1,223 deaths. They knew their product caused death. The companies did. Albert Bourla knew his product caused death. It was in their safety report. And so what they did is they made modifications. And remember, in 2021, the first booster was just the same shot, the same material. But when we got to 2022, then it became coded for the BA4, BA5 variant. And then in 2023, it was XBB. And now in 2024, it's JN1. So these versions are far milder. The spike protein is far less injurious. And so they became milder. So, but when I see case after case of heart damage, blood clots, maybe I get the card, I look at it, they've always taken it in 2021.
Yeah, and they're still jabbing people with these things. Even if they're milder as far as death goes, you're going to see all the other ailments that start to unfold still because that's in their body, and maybe the SV40. So it's like an infinite profit for the companies that own these things.
Well, you raise the point of cumulative toxicity. If you keep taking it over and over again, and you're right, if they're contaminated with SV40, maybe you have to get a certain dose of SV40 before a neoplasm is either accelerated or triggered. That's certainly possible. There's a paper by Shrestha and colleagues from Cleveland Clinic where it's clear the more administrations of the product, the greater and greater risk of recurrent respiratory infection. So it actually backfires. So those who never took it, the Cleveland Clinic employees, they have the lowest risk of the infection.
That's amazing. And that's not the average word on the street. Like when you start to bring this subject up, people are still ideologically possessed with this idea that you're wearing a tinfoil hat for even communicating something like that.
Well, they again, it's like a talisman. Well, I'm protected. Well, even though I get the infection over and over again, I'm not being hospitalized. You see what I mean? People have even come up with various memes that it became so bad. There was data from the UK that the majority of people in the hospital or dying with the virus, had been fully inoculated in the arm.
It's incredible.
So it's taken on a belief like a talisman. And what I mean by that is it's like a good luck charm. People think, well, just keep taking it. And if you get it again, just take some more. And just kind of take some more. And there's no limit to this. We've never had a product where it's supposed to prevent the disease. It obviously doesn't. It doesn't prevent spread. Our CDC director came out and said it doesn't prevent. And then you get the illness, you recover, and then you take more of it, to try to prevent the illness. You get the illness again, you take more of it, and it just keeps going and going and going.
And it's
It's
interesting.
there's
Go
some type
ahead.
of madness. Yeah.
It is madness, and it's psychological warfare, because you see that like Klaus Schwab and these people that you brought up are writing the playbook for you. They're just out in the open with it, and they've become sort of just to the point where they have so much power they don't even mind hiding it at this point.
There appears to be no secrets. Everything's in the open. WHO Agenda 2030, 500 of these products introduced. They mean it. They mean it.
Yeah.
And remember, this is not just regarding the pandemic. This is largely oriented towards children. So the schedule of products taken by children expands dramatically, year by year by year, particularly after 1986 when liability protection was given to the companies. And now at 1 year, I counted up, it's about 16 different products given at once. Now they're in combination syringes, but 16 at once. And the question is, can the body really handle that? And I think the data are suggesting no. We know 78% of sudden infant death syndrome occurs within 7 days of taking that battery. About 50% of it occurs within 48 hours. A febrile seizure, which happens when there's a severe reaction. You can imagine 16 of these causing immune responses and interactions with one another. A febrile seizure can result in a paper from Europe, about 40% chance it ends up with a neuropsychiatric disorder like ASD. It can lead to sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. The associations are very strong. So it's interesting. There's always been about 2.5% of people who just never take these at all. They said, my kids, I'm not taking them. And all the studies have analyzed this. They're always healthier. They're healthier. In the modern day, there's healthier. So there's papers by Hooker, Miller, Thomas, Mawson, an Amish study. They're always healthier. It makes sense. If you don't take a big battery, very low chance of sudden infant death syndrome or febrile seizure and ASD. So you can imagine, why not go healthy?
And were you questioning that and knowing that information before the pandemic, or is that when it came into your awareness and you started digging into all this?
Yeah, it wasn't an area of clinical practice for me because I'm an adult medicine doctor. It's largely in pediatrics, and I really didn't pay attention. So when my wife was pregnant with our kids, none of these were given to pregnant women. None. That just started around 2010. So that's a new development to take influenza, diphtheria, the acellular pertussis, and now, believe it or not, women actually take the pandemic virus product and they take RSV during pregnancy, the third child. That's all new. That's not like there's a history of doing that safely. That's all brand new. So when my kids were born, there was relatively little, but I realized that this religion we talked about, this ideology, it had been going on a long time. I got my card myself. My mom kept records. And because I was a healthcare provider like you, I had taken the influenza product every year. I had to, actually, to have hospital staff. I had taken 69 of these in the arm. Now, I didn't take the pandemic virus product, but I took 69 others. So for sure, I'm not against it, right? I can't be, labeled an anti-Ver. But what I've told people is, listen, I am now aware of the risks. I'm starting to pay attention of the risks here. I'm concerned. For instance, I gave you the data on the whole battery and febrile seizures and developing neuropsychiatric disorders. I've spoken at several big meetings, and I've had mothers, bring me to see their child, and it'll be like a teenage girl about age 17 or so in a wheelchair, obviously with contractures, very disabled, and say, here's a video of my daughter 3 years ago playing volleyball, and she's perfectly healthy and strong. And she took the Gardasil product and then developed this awful neurologic syndrome, looks like multiple sclerosis. I've seen several of those. All you have to do is see those once or twice, and you realize, wait a minute, I don't care how rare this is. This is devastating. Remember, the protection from any of these products is only theoretical. This is really important. Let's take polio. If you take a polio product in your arm and you never drink water that has the polio virus in it, and the current water supply does not, bottled water does not have it, then taking the product in the arm is irrelevant. It's not providing you any protection. Yet people will say, well, you're protected against polio. No, you're protected because the water supply is clean. So, the protection is theoretical. The side effects are real. That's the important. So this girl is crippled in the wheelchair. That's real. The mother has that forever. The child who develops ASD or Asperger's, that's real. That's forever. And so no matter how rare these side effects are, we have to balance that against this theoretical efficacy. Now, I was telling you about my mom and my set of products I took. I looked at the card, and as a kid, I had mumps. Me and my older brother had mumps. And I asked my mom, I said, well, why did I get 3 more mumps shots after that, since I already had mumps? She goes, well, I didn't know that. And it turns out, there is a product, the MMR. It has mumps in it. So they were just giving this out no matter what. Another one where it's an obvious overreach is rubella, or German measles. Turns out the rubella product is only needed in women who are going to get pregnant to try to prevent congenital rubella syndrome. Little boys just don't even get significant syndrome. So why, as a boy, did I get that? I didn't need the R in MMR. We should not be giving any R to boys because they don't get serious illness. We should only try to protect the women. Another example is hepatitis B. This kind of crept in the 1990s, where because some IV drug abusing women and those with active Hep B can actually transmit vertically to the baby, they needed hepatitis B products, but not the entire universe of healthy babies born. But yet the practice started giving it on the first day of life. And now there are papers written that when the kids really need protection, they're going to have sexual intercourse or, get into IV drugs or take tattoos, that and they're going to get exposed to hepatitis B. They would need protection, let's say at age 13 or 15. The products they took as babies were useless. It provides no protection. So it's obvious that something has happened in this madness, and the madness is just around the religious use of these products that has led to things that are completely unscientific, not clinically indicated, not medically necessary, and frankly dangerous.
Yeah, and it's such a sophisticated business model. And I've read The Real Anthony Fauci. I don't know if you read that book, but it sure lays out the history of how we got here with what you're talking about. And people do not want to, they'll make fun of you if you see that you even own that book. That's how religious it's gotten. And it's really unfortunate because I heard recently Bill Gates was trying to use all of his investment strategies towards AI to scrub the internet for anything having to do with this personal conversation we're having here, which is just censorship and totalitarian mindset of freedom of speech to be able to even communicate these ideas that you're talking about.
And he's going to say, well, it's leading to hesitancy. We could say, listen, it's leading to people not getting sudden infant death syndrome, or not getting Guillain-Barré syndrome, or not getting, iatrogenic myocarditis. Everything is risks and benefits. Nothing should be censored to tilt that risk-benefit analysis. Yet the censorship exists at the medical literature level. Do you know, if you take New England Journal of Medicine and you take any class of drugs, let's say ACE inhibitors or statins or calcium channel blockers, there are papers that say, well, there's risks and there's benefits. And you'll get disagreement. You're supposed to see that. In New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, JAMA, 100% of the papers say the products are safe and effective, that the benefits outweigh the risks in 100% of the papers. That can't be true because it never works out for anything else that way.
Such an interesting capture there. It's a very profitable business. It's probably $1 trillion business, I'm guessing, and they can't be held liable the way they've developed these companies, but it's unbelievable What is your protocol, if you could mind sharing just a little bit of it for people that are injured or want to find?
Mhm.
Do you want to just like refer to where they can
Mhm.
find it, or do you want to rattle off some of the things they can do?
Yeah, so McCullough protocol, base spike protein detoxification, just like the McCullough early treatment protocol. It's copyrighted in my name. I have no financial, benefit from this, but I do have tremendous accountability because if the early treatment protocol didn't work, people would be emailing me and just, letting me have it. The same thing with the detoxification program. If it didn't work, we've been using it now for 2 years in the office. People would tell me, and I clinically observe that on the internet, people are ruthless. And all I do is I get tons of messages every day. Thank goodness, Dr. McCullough's protocol. I feel better. I've gotten through it. It takes probably a year or more. It's the combined use of nattokinase, an oral supplement capsule, bromelain, and then curcumin, also in capsule format, taken on an empty stomach. Nattokinase 2,000 units twice a day, bromelain 500 milligrams a day, and curcumin 500 milligrams twice a day. There's now combination products from multiple companies. They're packaged as trios on Amazon. It's the most common probably product request because people know McCullough protocol works, and it's a base. We can add other drugs to it, and we do. But this is wonderful. It's been shown in preclinical models to dissolve and degrade the spike protein, block the inflammation, get this crud out of your body. That's the theoretical hope. I can't offer therapeutic claims because there are no large prospective randomized trials. The Biden administration spent $1 billion on this problem. They didn't investigate these three products. They actually didn't even investigate the spike protein to show you how far off base they are.
And how much has your license been attacked or your reputation been tarnished from this whole last 4 or 5 years?
I went from being the most published person in my world in history, well respected. I was the visiting endowed professor at Harvard in 2019. My Wikipedia page was scintillating all the way up until the summer of 2021. And then immediately, like this, it changed and said that, I was spreading false information, that I was pushing unproven drugs, and that I was pushing conspiracy theories. So it just became, literally trashed with propaganda from unknown editors. In fact, I found one of the Wikipedia editors, he made over 250 entries. I wonder what motivated him to change my Wikipedia page. I quickly got locked out. I couldn't give any input. So Wikipedia is, in a sense, just wide open defamation anonymously by people. So it's not a trustable resource at all. I was sued by a former health system because they said their name was being dragged into the media. I had more media time than Anthony Fauci did. I was, on primetime TV, certainly more than he was, providing the correct narrative. I'd been on a frequent contributor on Fox, still am, Newsmax, Real America's Voice. I've been on ABC, all the major channels. So, so that led to Medscape, a physician email service, listing me as one of the 20 worst doctors in America. On what grounds? All the other doctors had committed these heinous crimes, what have you. And there I was just on TV, giving the correct information. And I testified in the Senate twice, in the House, and then ultimately my contract was not renewed as an academic faculty for no reason. No reason. I prevailed in the health system lawsuits. I'm now dealing with the American Board of Internal Medicine, other agencies. There seems to be a relentless pursuit of anybody who will fairly review and present the data. France, there's 2,000 doctors like me that have been sidelined, delicensed, 1,000 in Australia, dozens in Canada. For any doctor who will go out there and show courage like I have, they have paid the price. Their whole career, literally, you work so hard your whole life, your whole career is dismantled literally by email and certified letter. There's no courtesy phone calls. There's no arguments. There's nothing else. It's almost like a silent machine just snuffing you out.
It's incredible. And how many people got the jab because they were forced into it for their jobs, to feed their families, the nurses, all the doctors, all the military, all the first responder, everybody. It's unbelievable. And can you rattle off just some of the data that you know, some of the stats on how many people you think have already died from this, or no?
Yeah, quickly, I'll have to. I think there'll be
Yeah.
another call coming in, but
Yeah.
our VAERS system has 19,027 certified vaccine deaths. Multiply that times 30. We're looking at 570,000 Americans have died after taking the product in the arm. It's astonishing. Globally, Dennis Rancourt, epidemiologist in Montreal, has the death count at 17 million. We've never seen a novel biologic product be introduced and cause this degree of death and not have it be recalled. Should have been recalled just after a handful of deaths.
Wow. And I know you got to get going. If you were going to die today, what would you want to share with the world?
I'd want the world to know that, I've always spoken the truth. I've been fair. I've been balanced. I've made my best attempt at saving as many people as I could with my face-to-face care of patients in the clinic, making house calls on occasion, and by publishing and promulgating the most widely used protocols worldwide. I mean, the last 4 years of my life have been the most rewarding years of my life because the impact has been so high. And I think historians will look back on this and say, the steps that Dr. McCullough outlined were reasonable. The world should have taken it. The warnings that he issued were on target. And in fact, his concerns were valid. And it may take another 15 to 20 years before we get to that level, but I'm convinced it's not like someone's going to go back and say, oh, the blood clots and heart damage were due to something else. That's not going to happen. It's just too obvious that this is unfolding right in front of us. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.